The town of Dust Hollow earned its name honestly. Everything about it, the buildings, the people, the dreams, eventually got ground down to nothing and blown away. Caleb Rourke learned that the hard way, standing in the middle of Main Street with dust coating his throat and shame burning in his chest. He'd arrived 3 days earlier with exactly $8, a bedroll, and a reputation for breaking horses that stretched across 2 counties. None of it mattered here. In Dust Hollow, you were either somebody or you were dirt. Caleb was dirt. "You're serious?" The man at the livery stable had laughed when Caleb asked about work. "Son, we got more horse breakers than horses. Try the mines. The mines. Where men went in young and came out old if they came out at all." Caleb had watched his father disappear into those same kind of holes back in Colorado. Watched his mother wait by the window until waiting was all she knew how to do. He'd sworn he'd never follow that path. So when he heard about Sheriff Hargrove's challenge, standing outside the saloon with his stomach eating itself from hunger, Caleb stopped to listen. "Crazy bastard serious," a man was saying, tobacco juice dribbling down his chin. "Says any man who can tame that black devil of his can marry one of his daughters." "Which one?" another asked. "Hell, take your pick. He's got 3. I'd take the youngest, Sarah. You seen her? Face like an angel." "You ain't taming that horse. Nobody is. Things killed 2 men already." Caleb's pulse quickened. A horse that couldn't be broken meant a challenge everyone else had given up on. That meant opportunity. "Where's this horse at?" he asked. The men turned, sizing him up with the casual cruelty of people who'd learned to measure a man's worth in seconds. "Who the hell are you?" "Name's Caleb Rourke." "Never heard of you." "You will have," Caleb said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. That got a laugh. "Sure, kid. Horses out at Hargrove's Ranch, 5 miles west. But don't waste your time. Sheriff ain't looking for some drifter to marry into his family. He's making a point." "What point?" "That some things can't be beaten. Not by force. Not by anything." Caleb went anyway. The Hargrove Ranch spread across the valley like a kingdom. White fences, red barn, main house with actual glass in the windows and paint that wasn't peeling. Caleb had never seen anything like it, except in his dreams. Sheriff Hargrove himself was on the porch when Caleb rode up on his borrowed mare, a sway-backed thing he'd rented for his last $2. "Help you?" Hargrove called out. He was a big man, not fat but solid, with gray threading through his dark hair and eyes that had seen too much to be impressed by anything. "Heard about your challenge, sir. I'd like to try." Hargrove studied him for a long moment. Then he smiled, and Caleb felt something cold slide down his spine. It wasn't a kind smile. "Would you now?" Hargrove descended the steps slowly, boots thudding on wood. "And who might you be?" "Caleb Rourke. I've broken horses from Texas to Montana." "That's so. Funny. You don't look like you got a pot to piss in." Heat crawled up Caleb's neck. "I'm good at what I do." "Good enough to marry into wealth? Into respect?" Hargrove circled him like a wolf sizing up prey. "Good enough to deserve one of my daughters?" The way he said it made the whole thing sound like a joke, but Caleb had nothing left to lose. "Let me try. If I fail, I fail. But if I succeed—" "If you succeed," Hargrove interrupted, "you get to marry one of my girls. That's the deal. 3 months. You tame that stallion, ride him into town, and you pick your bride. Fair enough?" It wasn't fair. Nothing about this was fair, but Caleb nodded. "Fair enough." "Good." Hargrove's smile widened. "Let me introduce you to your future." The stallion was in a reinforced pen behind the barn, and Caleb heard him before he saw him. Hooves striking wood, a scream that didn't sound like any horse he'd ever heard. Then he saw the animal itself, and his confidence cracked. The horse was massive, black as midnight, with a white star on his forehead that looked like a bullet wound. Scars crisscrossed his flanks. His eyes showed too much white. "This is Phantom," Hargrove said. "My late wife's horse. Or was supposed to be. Thing turned mean the day we got him. Killed my head groom. Killed a buyer from Kansas City who thought he could ride anything. Now he just kills time." "Why keep him?" "Reminder," Hargrove said simply. "Some things are too broken to fix." Caleb stared at the stallion. Phantom stared back, and Caleb saw something in those eyes that made his stomach twist. Not wildness. Something worse. Pain. I'll need supplies, Caleb said. Feed, tack, a place to sleep. Bunkhouse is yours, food at dawn and dusk. Everything else you need is in the barn. Hargrove turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Rourke? My daughters. Sarah's the youngest, pretty as a picture. Margaret's the middle girl, smart, that one. Learned to read from real books. And the third? Lena. Hargrove's voice flattened. You won't see much of her. She keeps to herself. The way he said it made Caleb curious, but he didn't push. He had 3 months to figure out this family's dynamics. Right now, he needed to figure out how to survive this horse. The first week nearly killed him. Caleb tried everything he knew. Gentle approach, firm hand, round pen work. The stallion rejected it all with violent prejudice. On day 3, Phantom caught him in the ribs with a kick that cracked something. On day 5, he slammed Caleb against the fence so hard he saw stars. By day 7, Caleb was limping, bruised, and starting to understand why 2 men had died. He was in the barn, pressing a cold cloth to his swollen eye when he heard footsteps. You're doing it wrong. Caleb turned. A woman stood in the doorway, backlit by late afternoon sun. It took his eyes a moment to adjust, and when they did, he saw someone he hadn't seen around the ranch before. She was large, not just heavy, but tall, broad-shouldered, built like she could work alongside any man and outlast most. Her brown hair was pulled back in a practical braid. Her dress was simple, faded, but her eyes were sharp, and they were studying him with something between pity and frustration. Who are you? Caleb asked. Lena Hargrove. The third daughter. The one her father dismissed with a shrug. Caleb straightened up, wincing. Didn't mean to be rude, ma'am. Your father said... I know what my father said. She stepped into the barn, and Caleb noticed she moved quietly for someone her size. He says a lot of things. Doesn't make them true. You think you can do better with that horse? I think you're trying to break something that's already broken. That's not training. That's torture. The words hit harder than they should have. Caleb had prided himself on being good with horses, on having a gentle touch. But this animal had pushed him past patience into frustration, and frustration into force. What would you do? He asked, and he was surprised to find he actually wanted to know. Lena walked to the pen. Phantom saw her coming and charged the fence, teeth bared. She didn't flinch, just stood there, looking at him. See how he leads with aggression? That's fear. Something hurt him bad enough that attack feels safer than retreat. She glanced at Caleb. You can't beat fear out of something. You have to show it there's another way. How? Patience, consistency, no expectations. She turned to face him fully. You here to tame this horse or to win a bride? The bluntness caught him off guard. Both? Wrong answer. You want to succeed. Forget the prize. Focus on the process. Otherwise, you'll keep trying to force something that can't be forced, and either he'll kill you or you'll break him in a way that doesn't matter. Caleb felt heat rise in his face. With respect, ma'am, I've been breaking horses since I was 12. And how's that working for you? She gestured at his bruised face, his limping stance. Look, I don't care if you live or die. I don't care if you marry Sarah or Margaret or run off with the saloon girl. But I do care about that horse. He deserves better than this. Before Caleb could respond, she was gone, footsteps fading across the yard. He stood there, anger and shame fighting for dominance. Who did she think she was? Some rancher's daughter who'd never had to struggle for anything, telling him how to do his job? But that night, lying in the bunkhouse with his ribs aching, he kept hearing her voice. You're trying to break something that's already broken. The next morning, Caleb tried something different. Instead of entering the pen with a rope and purpose, he just sat on the fence. Phantom paced, snorted, charged once. Caleb didn't move. After an hour, the horse stopped paying attention to him. Progress. He did the same thing the next day, and the next. By day 4 of this new approach, Phantom would let him sit inside the pen, as long as Caleb stayed near the fence and didn't look directly at him. Better, a voice said. Lena was back, watching from outside the pen. She had a bucket in her hand. You can actually get close to him, she continued, setting the bucket down. But you need to give him a reason to want you close. Food? Not food. Work, she pointed at the bucket. That's curry combs and brushes. Horses are social animals. They groom each other, help each other with spots they can't reach. If you can become useful instead of threatening, he might let you in. Caleb looked at the massive, scarred stallion, then at the grooming tools. You're insane. Probably. She smiled, and it transformed her face completely. But I'm also right. It took 2 weeks before Phantom let Caleb touch him. 2 weeks of sitting, waiting, showing the horse that he wasn't a threat. 2 weeks of Lena appearing at odd hours, never for long, always with another small piece of advice. Don't stare at him. That's predator behavior. When he turns his ear toward you, talk to him. Doesn't matter what you say. He needs to learn your voice means safety. You're standing too square. Angle your body. Give him an escape route. Slowly, impossibly, it worked. Phantom's aggression faded to wariness to tolerance. The day Caleb ran a brush down the horse's neck and Phantom didn't bolt felt like a miracle. Good, Lena said from her perch on the fence. Now the real work starts. Caleb had started looking forward to her visits. She didn't talk much about herself, deflected most questions with skill that suggested lots of practice. But she knew horses better than anyone he'd ever met, and more than that, she seemed to actually see him, not the broke drifter, not the desperate man chasing an impossible dream, just him. Can I ask you something? Caleb said one evening while Phantom dozed in the corner of the pen. Depends on the question. Why are you helping me? If I succeed, I'm supposed to marry one of your sisters. Lena was quiet for a long time. Sarah and Margaret will be fine no matter what happens. They're pretty, they're charming, they'll marry well with or without this spectacle. She picked at the fence rail. And maybe I'm tired of watching things suffer because my father thinks cruelty proves a point. What point is he trying to prove? That nothing good comes easy, that most people fail, that he's smarter than everyone else. She looked at Caleb directly. You're not going to win this, you know. Even if you tame Phantom, my father won't give you what you actually want. How do you know what I want? Because I've seen you watching Sarah at dinner, seen how you try to catch Margaret's eye when she walks past. You want the prize you think you were promised. Her voice gentled. I'm not judging you. I'm just telling you the truth. This whole thing is rigged. Caleb wanted to argue, but something in her eyes stopped him. Sadness, maybe, or just exhaustion. Then why not walk away? He asked. From the horse? Because he deserves better. From you? She shrugged. Maybe I'm curious to see if you're different than you look. The weeks blurred together. Summer heat gave way to autumn chill. Caleb's bruises faded, replaced by calluses and lean muscle from hours of work. Phantom transformed too, still spirited, still powerful, but no longer violent. The breakthrough came in October. Caleb had been working with a saddle blanket, letting Phantom get used to weight on his back. The horse tolerated it with snorts and sidesteps, but no real resistance. Lena watched from her usual spot, offering corrections. Keep your movements slow. He needs to know what's coming before it happens. Caleb laid the blanket across Phantom's back for the 20th time. The horse's skin twitched, but he didn't move. Good, Lena murmured. Now try the saddle. His hands were shaking as he lifted it. This was the moment that had broken other men. The moment when Phantom's rage would return and all this progress would shatter. The saddle settled onto the horse's back. Phantom's ears flicked back, his muscles bunched. Then, nothing. He stood there, breathing hard, but he stood. I'll be damned, Caleb whispered. Not yet, Lena said, but she was smiling. But you're close. That night, for the first time in months, Caleb ate dinner in the main house. Sheriff Hargrove had insisted, saying he wanted to see if the drifter was still alive. Sarah was there, golden-haired and perfect, making polite conversation. Margaret sat across from her, dark-eyed and clever, asking pointed questions about Caleb's progress. Hargrove presided over it all like a king at court. Lena served the food. It took Caleb a moment to realize what he was seeing. While her sisters sat like ladies, Lena moved through the room like help, filling glasses, clearing plates. No one acknowledged her except to make requests. Lena, more bread! Lena, the roast is cold. She did it all without complaint, without expression. But when she passed behind Caleb's chair, he caught her eye and saw something that made his chest hurt. Resignation. Like this was just how things were, and fighting it had stopped being worth the effort. After dinner, Hargrove pulled Caleb aside. Margaret tells me you've made progress. Yes, sir. Phantom's accepting the saddle now. Another week or two I should be able to ride him. Good, good. Hargrove poured himself whiskey. And which of my daughters has caught your eye? The question was a trap. Caleb felt it in his bones. I'm focused on the horse, sir. Modest. I appreciated that. Hargrove swirled his drink. But let's be honest, Rourke, you're not doing this for the love of horsemanship. You want what you can't have, a pretty wife, a place in society, respect. I want to earn my way. By marrying up? Hargrove laughed. Nothing wrong with ambition. Just want to make sure you understand the stakes. My daughters aren't just wives. They're investments, legacy. You bring anything to this table besides a way with horses? Caleb's jaw tightened. No, sir. Didn't think so. Hargrove clapped him on the shoulder. But hell, you've lasted longer than most. We'll see what happens when you ride that horse into town. The dismissal was clear. Caleb left, anger burning in his throat. He found Lena in the barn, checking on the horses for the night. He's a bastard, Caleb said without preamble. Yes. She didn't look up from checking a mare's water. How do you stand it? Practice. She moved to the next stall. You get used to anything if you have to. You shouldn't have to. Now she looked at him, and her expression was complicated. That's kind of you to say, but kind words don't change anything. What would? I don't know. She leaned against the stall door. Leave, maybe. But I've got nowhere to go. No money, no skills anyone values. I'm good with horses, but who's going to hire a woman to train them? I'm good at managing this place, but it'll go to Sarah's husband when my father dies. She laughed, but it sounded broken. I'm good at being invisible. That's my real talent. Caleb wanted to say something, anything, to make it better. But what could he say? That she deserved more? She knew that life was unfair. She lived that every day. So instead he said, "Thank you for helping me. You didn't have to." No, Lena agreed, but I wanted to. The next 3 weeks were the hardest of Caleb's life. Riding Phantom required trust the horse hadn't given yet. Every time Caleb tried to mount, the stallion would shy or buck, not violently, not like before, but enough to make it clear he wasn't ready. Lena coached him through it with patience that seemed endless. Don't force it. Let him tell you when he's ready. What if he's never ready? Then you haven't earned it yet. Finally, on a cold November morning with frost on the ground and the deadline a week away, Phantom stood still while Caleb swung into the saddle. For one perfect moment, man and horse were balanced, united. Then Phantom took a step, and Caleb moved with him, and it felt like flying. Holy hell, Caleb breathed. Lena, we did it. We actually... But when he looked around, Lena was gone. He found her later in the back pasture, standing alone. Why'd you leave? He asked. Didn't want to intrude. Her voice was carefully neutral. Intrude? You made this happen. This is your victory as much as mine. No. She shook her head. This is your victory, your prize, your life. She finally looked at him, and her eyes were wet. I'm happy for you, Caleb. I mean that. You worked hard. You earned this. I couldn't have done it without... Yes, you could have. Eventually. I just helped speed things along. She wiped her eyes quickly, embarrassed. Sarah will make you a good wife. She's kind in her way. Or Margaret, if you want someone who'll challenge you. Either way, you'll have what you came for. Caleb felt like he'd been punched. Because she was right. He had come here wanting exactly that. A beautiful wife, an easy life. Escape from poverty and struggle. But somewhere along the way, those things had stopped mattering as much. Somewhere along the way, the best part of his day had become these quiet moments with a woman everyone else dismissed. He didn't know what to say. Didn't know how to explain that the dream he'd been chasing was starting to feel hollow. So he said nothing, and Lena walked away. And Caleb stood in the pasture, wondering when everything had gotten so complicated. The day of reckoning came on a Saturday. The whole town turned out to watch Caleb ride Phantom down Main Street. People lined the boardwalks, pointing, whispering, waiting to see if he'd actually done it or if this was some kind of joke. Sheriff Hargrove waited in front of the saloon, his daughters arranged beside him like prizes at a fair. Sarah in blue silk, Margaret in green, both beautiful, both smiling. Lena was there too, standing slightly apart, wearing brown. Caleb rode Phantom through the crowd, and the horse was magnificent, proud, powerful, completely under control. Proof that the impossible could be done. The crowd erupted in applause. Hargrove stepped forward, arms spread wide. Ladies and gentlemen, it seems we have a winner. Caleb Rourke has done what no man could do. He's tamed the untamable. More applause. Caleb dismounted, every eye on him. Now, Hargrove continued, his voice carrying, according to our agreement, Mr. Rourke may choose his bride from among my daughters. This was it, the moment Caleb had worked for, bled for. Sarah smiled at him encouragingly. Margaret raised an eyebrow, curious what he'd choose. Caleb opened his mouth to speak, and Hargrove's smile turned cruel. Of course, the sheriff said loudly. I didn't specify which daughters I meant, did I? He gestured broadly. Mr. Rourke, meet your bride. Lena, come here. The crowd went silent. Lena's face drained of color. She didn't move. Now, Lena, Hargrove commanded. She walked forward like someone approaching an execution. When she reached her father's side, Hargrove put a heavy hand on her shoulder. There you go, Rourke. A deal's a deal. You wanted one of my daughters, you got one. He was grinning now, and Caleb understood. This was the point. This was the cruelty Lena had warned him about. The crowd started to laugh. Not everyone, some looked uncomfortable, but enough. Enough to make it clear what they thought of this match. Lena stood there, hands clasped, eyes on the ground, humiliated, offered up as a joke, and Caleb had a choice. He could protest, could demand the terms be honored as he'd understood them, could walk away and save himself from being tied to the woman everyone pitied. Or he looked at Lena, really looked at her, saw the woman who'd spent months teaching him, helping him, believing in him when he'd failed again and again. The woman who knew more about horses, about patience, about real strength than anyone he'd ever met. The woman who'd asked for nothing and given everything. The crowd was still laughing. Hargrove was still smiling. Sarah and Margaret looked embarrassed but stayed silent. Caleb stepped forward and took Lena's hand. The laughter faltered. You're wrong, Caleb said, loud enough for everyone to hear. He looked straight at Hargrove. About all of it. You think you're teaching me a lesson? That you've cheated me somehow? He turned to Lena, whose eyes were wide with shock. This woman, Caleb said clearly, is the only reason I succeeded, not your prize horse, not your challenge. Her. She taught me everything that mattered, and if choosing her is supposed to be my punishment, he smiled and meant it. Then I'll take it gladly. Silence. Complete ringing silence. Hargrove's face went red. Now you listen here. No. Caleb's voice was steel. I lived up to my end. I tamed your horse, and I'll take my bride as promised. Lena, if you'll have me. He knew it wasn't romantic, knew it wasn't the proposal any woman deserved, but he also knew he meant every word, and maybe that mattered more. Lena looked at him for a long moment, then, quietly, yes. And just like that, Caleb's old dream died, and something new, something he didn't quite understand yet, took its place. The wedding happened 3 days later in the same church where Lena's mother had been buried. Caleb stood at the altar in borrowed clothes that didn't quite fit, watching Lena walk down the aisle alone because her father had refused to give her away. She's getting what she deserves, Hargrove had said that morning, his voice dripping with contempt. A desperate man and a life of struggle. Perfect match. The church was nearly empty. A few ranch hands showed up out of loyalty to Lena. The preacher was there because he had to be. Sarah and Margaret sat in the front pew, their faces carefully blank. No one else in Dust Hollow thought this wedding worth witnessing. Lena wore a simple gray dress. No veil, no flowers. She walked with her eyes forward, and Caleb couldn't read her expression at all. When she reached him, he whispered, "You don't have to do this." "Neither do you," she whispered back. But they both said their vows anyway, and the preacher pronounced them man and wife, and that was that. Caleb Rourke had married the woman no one wanted, and Lena Hargrove had married a man who'd wanted someone else. The ride back to the ranch was silent. Caleb had borrowed a wagon, and Lena sat beside him with her hands folded in her lap. Phantom was tied to the back, following calmly. "Your father's giving us the old foreman's cabin," Lena said finally. "It's small, needs work, but it's ours." That's something. "He's also giving us 20 acres on the north end. The rocky part no one can farm." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Generous." "He thinks we'll fail." Lena's voice was flat. "Thinks we'll come crawling back within a year, begging for scraps." "What do you think?" She looked at him for the first time since the ceremony. I think we're both too stubborn to give him that satisfaction. The cabin was worse than Caleb had imagined. One room with a stone fireplace, gaps in the floorboards, a roof that leaked in 3 places. The furniture consisted of a broken chair, a table with 2 legs, and a mattress that smelled like mildew. Home, Lena said, and Caleb couldn't tell if she was joking. They spent the rest of the day making it livable. Caleb patched the roof while Lena scrubbed years of dirt from the floor. They worked without talking much, the awkwardness between them thick as fog. When night fell, they sat on opposite sides of the room, eating bread and cheese Lena had brought from the main house. I'll sleep by the fire, Caleb said. You take the bed. It's your bed too now. Lena, I know you didn't want this, she interrupted. She wasn't looking at him. I know you wanted Sarah, or Margaret, someone pretty and refined, someone who'd make people respect you instead of pity you. That's not... It's fine. Her voice cracked slightly. You did a noble thing in town, stood up for me when no one else would. I won't forget that. But you don't have to pretend this is what you wanted. Caleb set down his food. You're right. This isn't what I wanted. When I came to Dust Hollow, I was chasing a fantasy, a shortcut to a better life. He paused. But that was before. Before what? Before I knew you. Lena looked up sharply. Don't. Don't what? Don't try to make this into something it's not. We're stuck together because of my father's cruelty and your pride. That's all this is. Is that what you think? Caleb moved closer. That I married you out of pride? I think you married me because walking away would have made you look like a coward. And I think I married you because I had no other choice. She stood up, wrapping her arms around herself. I'm grateful, Caleb. Truly. You saved me from a lifetime of being invisible in that house. But let's not pretend there's more to it than survival. She was right, and she was wrong, and Caleb didn't know how to explain the difference. So he didn't try. Okay, he said quietly. Survival it is. That first week set the pattern for all the weeks that followed. They were polite strangers sharing a space, working toward separate goals that sometimes overlapped. Caleb spent his days trying to make the 20 acres of rocky soil produce something. Anything. He cleared brush, pulled stones, turned earth that fought him every step. His hands bled. His back screamed. By nightfall, he was too exhausted to do more than eat and collapse. Lena worked just as hard. She tended their small garden, fixed the cabin's endless problems, and started training Phantom in earnest. The horse responded to her in ways he never had with Caleb, moving through drills with precision and grace. You should be doing this, Caleb said one evening, watching her work. Not me. You're the one with real talent. Talent doesn't matter if no one will hire you, Lena replied. She ran Phantom through a turn, her seat perfect. Besides, Phantom's yours now. You tamed him. We tamed him. You get the credit, though. That's how it works. The bitterness in her voice stung because it was true. Caleb had gotten everything, the acclaim, the victory, the reputation. Lena had done half the work and received none of the recognition. That's not right, he said. No, but it's real. She dismounted, patting Phantom's neck. You want dinner? They ate in silence that night, the space between them feeling wider than the small cabin should allow. Word spread fast in Dust Hollow about the struggling newlyweds on the worthless land. People found it entertaining, the broke drifter and the fat daughter trying to make something from nothing. Give 'em 3 months, Caleb heard at the general store. I say 2. That land's cursed. Hargrove's laughing his ass off, I bet. Caleb bought his supplies and left without responding. What could he say? They weren't wrong. The land was terrible, money was running out, and he and Lena barely spoke beyond practical necessities. But he was damned if he'd give up. The breaking point came in December, when the first snow hit and their crops, what little they'd managed to grow, died overnight. Caleb stood in the frozen field, looking at rows of blackened plants, and felt something inside him crack. 4 months of work. Gone. They had almost nothing saved. Winter was here, and he had no idea how they'd survive. When he came back to the cabin, Lena was cooking something that smelled better than it had any right to. It's bad, he said. I know. I saw. She kept stirring. We'll figure it out. How? We've got maybe enough food for 2 months if we're careful. No money coming in. And I can't exactly get hired on anywhere. They all think I'm either crazy or stupid for marrying you. He regretted the words the moment they left his mouth. Lena went very still. I see. Lena, I didn't mean Yes, you did. She set down the spoon carefully. You meant exactly that. And you're right. Marrying me has cost you everything, your reputation, your prospects, your future. That's not what I said. It's what you meant. She finally looked at him, and her eyes were dry but hard. I told you that first night. This is survival. We're surviving together because we have to. But don't pretend you're happy about it. I never said I was unhappy. You don't have to say it, her voice rose. I see it every time you look at me. Every time we're in town and you see Sarah or Margaret. Every time someone makes a joke and you remember that you're stuck with the daughter no one wanted. That's not fair. None of this is fair, she was shouting now, months of suppressed anger finally breaking free. You think I wanted this? You think I dreamed of marrying a man who sees me as a consolation prize? I'm grateful you stood up for me, Caleb, but I'm not grateful enough to pretend this marriage is anything but a business arrangement. Then what do you want? Caleb shouted back. You want me to lie? Say I'm thrilled about starving through winter on land that won't grow anything? I want you to be honest. I want you to stop looking at me like I'm the reason everything went wrong. You're not the reason. Then what am I? Lena's voice broke. What am I to you, Caleb? Because I don't know anymore. I don't know if you hate me or pity me or just tolerate me, and I can't. She stopped, pressing her hands to her face. I can't keep doing this. The silence that followed was suffocating. When Lena lowered her hands, her expression had gone carefully blank. I'm going to check on the horses. She left, and Caleb stood in the cabin they'd built together, surrounded by the life they were failing to create, and felt more alone than he had in years. He found her in the barn an hour later, brushing Phantom with mechanical precision. I'm sorry, Caleb said. For what? Telling the truth? She didn't stop brushing. For making you feel like you're the problem. He stepped closer. You're not, Lena. You're the only reason we've made it this far. The garden was your idea. The repairs, the budgeting, the way you've stretched every dollar, that's all you. But? No, but. Caleb ran a hand through his hair. I'm frustrated. I'm scared. And I'm taking it out on you because you're here and you won't fight back. I just fought back. You defended yourself. That's different. He sat on a hay bale. When I came to Dust Hollow, I thought I had everything figured out. Tame the horse, marry the girl, live the dream. Simple. Nothing's simple. No. He looked at her. And the truth is, I don't know what I feel most of the time. I'm confused and angry and grateful all at once. But the one thing I know for certain is that you're not the problem. You're the only part of this mess that actually makes sense. Lena stopped brushing. What does that mean? It means when I watch you work with Phantom, I see someone who understands things I'm still learning. When I see how you've kept us fed on almost nothing, I'm amazed. And when I remember how you helped me for months without asking for anything in return, he shook his head. I don't hate you, Lena. I'm not even sure I pity you. Mostly I'm just trying to figure out how to be someone worthy of what you did for me. She turned to face him fully. You think you owe me? I think we're partners. Or we should be. He stood. I know I said things in town that made it sound romantic, like I chose you. Truth is, your father forced both our hands, but that doesn't mean we can't make something real out of it. Real how? Honest. Equal. He moved closer. I can't promise I won't be an idiot sometimes. Can't promise I won't mess up or say the wrong thing. But I can promise I'll stop pretending this is something it's not. We're married. We're stuck on terrible land with no money and a whole town waiting for us to fail. But we're stuck together, and maybe that's enough to build on. Lena searched his face for a long moment. You really mean that? Yeah, I do. Okay. She set down the brush. Then we need a plan, real plan, because pretty words won't keep us alive through winter. They spent that night at the kitchen table going through everything they had and everything they needed. The numbers were grim. We could sell Phantom, Lena said quietly. No. Caleb, he's worth... I know what he's worth. But he's not just money. He's proof we can do the impossible. Caleb studied their meager inventory. There has to be another way. We could ask my father for help. The suggestion hung between them like poison. No, Caleb said again. Pride won't feed us. It's not pride. It's survival. The second we go to him, he wins. He gets to say we failed, just like he predicted. And then what? We become his charity cases for the rest of our lives? Lena nodded slowly. You're right, but that means we need money. Fast. I could hire on at the mines. You said you'd never... I said a lot of things. Caleb met her eyes. Some of them were stupid. The mines are dangerous, but the pay's decent. If I can work through winter, save everything I make, we might have enough to make it to spring. What about the ranch, the horses? You can handle that better than me anyway. He managed a smile. Besides, someone needs to keep this place running. Lena looked at him for a long time. Then she reached across the table and took his hand. It was the first time they'd touched since the wedding, and Caleb felt something shift in his chest. We're really doing this? She asked. Yeah, we are. Caleb started at the mines the next Monday. The work was exactly as brutal as he'd feared. 10 hours a day in the dark, breathing dust, swinging a pickaxe until his shoulders screamed. Men died there regularly, and everyone knew it. They just needed the money too badly to care. But the worst part wasn't the danger. It was coming home each night to find Lena had managed everything perfectly without him. She'd fixed the leak in the barn roof, started training 2 new horses she'd taken on commission, negotiated a deal with the general store to trade eggs for supplies. She was thriving, and Caleb felt increasingly useless outside of his paycheck. You're doing good work, Lena said one night, tending to his blistered hands. I'm swinging a pickaxe. You're building a business. We're both doing what needs to be done. She wrapped his hand carefully. Don't diminish what you're contributing, but it was hard not to, especially when he saw how much better everything ran when he wasn't there to fumble through it. The holidays came and went without celebration. They couldn't afford it, and besides, neither of them felt particularly festive. On Christmas Eve, Lena made a small meal from their dwindling supplies, and they ate by lamplight. My mother loved Christmas, Lena said suddenly. She'd make this huge feast, invite everyone. The house would be full of music and laughter. She smiled sadly. My father stopped all that after she died. Said it was frivolous. What happened to her? Caleb asked. Fever, quick and ugly. Lena stared at her plate. I was 14. After that, everything changed. Sarah and Margaret had each other, but She stopped. I became invisible. Easier that way. Easier for who? Everyone. She looked it up. My father didn't know what to do with a daughter who looked like me. I reminded him of my mother, same build, same features, but without the beauty that made it acceptable. So he just stopped seeing me. And eventually everyone else did too. Caleb felt anger burn in his throat. That's not right. No. But it's how it was. She pushed her food around. You asked me once why I helped you with Phantom. Truth is, I saw myself in that horse. Something broken, something no one wanted to fix. And I thought maybe if I could help him, it meant there was hope for me too. Lena, I know how that sounds. Pathetic, right? The sad fat girl looking for validation through a horse. That's not what I was going to say. Caleb reached across the table. I was going to say I'm glad you did. Help him, help me. Because you were right. I couldn't have done it alone. And not just with Phantom, with all of this. Lena's eyes shone in the lamplight. We make a decent team when we're not at each other's throats. Yeah, we do. They sat in companionable silence, and for the first time since the wedding, Caleb felt like they might actually make it. January brought a cold snap that killed half their chickens and cracked the cabin's foundation. February brought a cave-in at the mine that took 3 men. Caleb wasn't among them, but he came home shaking and stayed that way for hours. Lena held him without speaking, and Caleb realized he couldn't remember the last time someone had just let him fall apart. I can't go back there, he said into her shoulder. Okay. We need the money. We'll figure it out. She pulled back to look at him. I mean it, Caleb. We'll find another way. But I'm not losing you to that place. Something in her voice made his heart stutter. Losing me? She looked away quickly. You know what I mean. We're partners. Can't run this place alone. But that wasn't what she'd meant, and they both knew it. Caleb quit the mines the next day. They were broke again, but he was alive, and that had to count for something. "I've been thinking," Lena said a week later. She was mucking out stalls while Caleb repaired fence posts. "What if we focused on what we're actually good at? Which is horses. Specifically, problem horses." She leaned on her pitchfork. "Nobody else around here knows how to handle difficult animals. They just break them or give up. But we know different. We could train horses other people can't." Caleb considered it. "We'd need a reputation. Need people to trust us. We have Phantom. That's proof right there. Phantom was your father's horse. People might think he set it up. Then we get another one. Take on the worst case we can find, fix it, show everyone what we can do." It was risky. They had no money to buy a problem horse, and taking one on commission meant working for free until the job was done. But it was also the first plan that actually felt possible. "Okay," Caleb said, "let's do it." They found their test case at the stockyard, a gray mare that had thrown and kicked 3 different owners. She was destined for the rendering plant until Lena convinced the owner to give them 2 months. "You fix her. She's yours to sell," the man said. "You fail. Well, at least you tried." The mare was worse than Phantom had been. Meaner, more unpredictable, with a bite that drew blood and hooves that struck like lightning. Caleb got kicked in the thigh the first day and limped for a week. But Lena saw what he'd missed. The mare's left rear leg had an old injury, badly healed. Every time someone tried to ride her, the weight triggered pain, and pain triggered rage. "She's not mean," Lena explained, examining the leg carefully. "She's hurt, and she's learned that violence is the only way to make it stop." They spent weeks just helping the mare heal. Warm compresses, gentle exercise, patience. Slowly, the limp improved. And as the pain faded, so did the aggression. Caleb watched Lena work and felt something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't the infatuation he'd felt watching Sarah from afar. It was deeper, quieter, like recognition. "You're staring," Lena said without looking up. "Sorry." "Don't be sorry, just tell me why." Caleb hesitated. "I'm trying to figure out when you stopped being someone I was stuck with and started being someone I can't imagine being without." Lena's hand stilled on the mare's leg. "Caleb, I know the timing's bad. I know we're broke and struggling and probably crazy for trying this. But I need you to know." He moved closer. "You're not my consolation prize. You're not the daughter no one wanted. You're the strongest, smartest person I've ever met, and I'm grateful every day that your father was cruel enough to give us a chance." "That's the exhaustion talking," Lena said, but her voice shook. "No, it's the truth." He touched her shoulder gently. "I can't promise we'll succeed. Can't promise I won't mess up again, but I can promise I see you, Lena, really see you, and what I see is extraordinary." She turned to face him, and her eyes were bright with tears. "You don't have to say these things. I'm not saying them because I have to. I'm saying them because they're true." He cupped her face carefully. "And because I'm tired of pretending I don't feel them." "Feel what?" "This." And he kissed her. It wasn't smooth or practiced. Their noses bumped and Lena made a surprise sound, and Caleb almost pulled away thinking he'd made a terrible mistake. But then she kissed him back, and everything else fell away. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lena laughed shakily. "Well, that was unexpected." "Bad unexpected?" "No." She touched his face. "Good unexpected. Really good." They stood there in the barn, covered in dirt and horsehair, and Caleb felt something settle in his chest. Not the desperate grasping he'd felt chasing Sarah, something steadier, like coming home. "We should probably get back to work," Lena said eventually. "Probably." Neither of them moved. The mare snorted, impatient, and they broke apart laughing. That night they slept in the same bed for the first time. Nothing happened except sleep. They were both too exhausted for anything else. But Caleb woke with Lena's head on his shoulder and felt something fierce and protective rise in his chest. This woman had saved him in ways that had nothing to do with horses. Had seen him at his worst and stayed anyway. Had built a life from nothing and called him partner. He wasn't going to let her down. The mare sold for 3 times what they'd hoped. Word spread fast about the miracle workers who could fix any horse, and suddenly they had more work than they could handle. Spring came, and with it, hope. Real hope, not the desperate kind Caleb had carried to Dust Hollow, but something earned through months of struggle and survival. They were making it. Against every odd, every prediction, every cruel joke, they were actually making it. And somewhere along the way, the marriage of convenience had become something neither of them had expected. Something real. By summer, the ranch had transformed into something Caleb barely recognized. The rocky North Acres that Hargrove had given them as punishment now held sturdy corrals, a training ring, and a barn that didn't leak. They'd done it all themselves, piece by piece, trading labor for materials when they couldn't afford to buy. Their reputation grew faster than either of them had expected. Ranchers came from 3 counties away with horses no one else would touch. A bucking gelding that had crippled its last trainer, a mare so skittish she'd break through fences, a stallion that bit anything within reach. Lena worked with each one, patient and methodical, while Caleb handled the business side, negotiations, schedules, the endless paperwork that came with running an operation. They fell into a rhythm that felt natural, complementary. Where one was weak, the other was strong. But success brought visibility, and visibility brought trouble. "You hear what they're saying in town?" Caleb asked one evening. He'd just returned from delivering a trained horse to its owner, and his jaw was tight with anger. Lena looked up from the ledger she'd been reviewing. "I can imagine. They're saying I'm riding your coattails, that you do all the real work and I just collect the money." He paced the small cabin. "One guy actually called me your assistant. Does it bother you?" "Of course it bothers me. I'm your husband, not your—" He stopped, seeing her expression. "What? Is that what bothers you? That they don't respect you? Or that they're actually right?" The words hit like a slap. "That's not fair. Isn't it?" Lena set down her pen. "You're good with people, Caleb. Good at selling our services, handling clients. But when it comes to the actual training, you know I'm better. We both know it. So what, I'm just supposed to accept being called your assistant?" "You're supposed to accept the truth." Her voice was gentle, but firm. "We're a team. I'm better with horses. You're better with people. Neither of us could do this alone. Why does it matter what strangers call you?" Because it did matter. Because Caleb had spent his whole life trying to prove he was somebody, and being seen as lesser, even to his own wife, felt like failure. But he couldn't say that without sounding petty, so he said nothing. Lena watched him struggle for a moment, then sighed. "Come here." He sat beside her reluctantly. She took his hand, studying the calluses that matched her own. "You think I don't know what it costs you?" she asked quietly. "Letting me take the lead? Watching other men dismiss you because I'm better at this one thing? It's not one thing. It's everything. No, it's horses. That's all." She squeezed his hand. "But you're the one who convinced me we could make this work. You're the one who quit the mines because you believed in us. You're the one who handles every difficult client, every negotiation, every problem I can't solve because I'm too direct or too blunt." She met his eyes. "You think that makes you less? It makes you essential." Caleb wanted to believe her, but the voices in his head, the ones that sounded like his father, like Hargrove, like every man who'd ever dismissed him, said otherwise. "I just want to matter," he said finally. "You do matter. To me. To this place." Lena leaned her forehead against his. "But if you need the world to know it, we'll find a way to show them." The opportunity came sooner than expected. Marcus Thorne rode into their yard on a Tuesday morning, bringing with him a reputation that preceded him by miles. He was a wealthy rancher from 2 territories over, known for breeding championship horses and for having an ego the size of Montana. "Heard you folks think you can train anything," Thorne said, not bothering to dismount. He looked around their modest operation with obvious disdain. Interesting claim for such a small outfit. Caleb felt his hackles rise at the tone, but Lena spoke first. "We don't think we can train anything. We know our limits. But most horses people call impossible or just misunderstood." "Misunderstood," Thorne laughed. "That's one word for it. I've got another word. Worthless. Got a 3-year-old colt, best bloodlines money can buy, refuses to be ridden. 5 trainers have tried. All failed." "What's wrong with him?" Lena asked. "If I knew that, I wouldn't be here." Thorne finally dismounted, and Caleb saw he was older than he'd first appeared, maybe 60, with the weathered look of a man who'd spent his life outdoors. "I'm willing to pay top dollar, but I've got conditions." "What conditions?" Caleb asked. "I want results in 6 weeks, and I want proof you can actually do what you claim." Thorne's eyes narrowed. I'll bring the colt here. You work your magic, but I'm also bringing my head trainer to observe everything you do. If you succeed, you get paid, and I spread the word about your methods. If you fail, you admit publicly that you're frauds." Lena and Caleb exchanged glances. 6 weeks wasn't much time, especially for a horse that had already defeated 5 trainers, and having someone watching their every move would add pressure they didn't need. But the money Thorn was offering would carry them through winter and then some. "We'll need to see the horse first," Caleb said. "Make sure it's something we can actually help." "Fair enough." Thorn smiled, and it reminded Caleb uncomfortably of Hargrove. "I'll have him here by week's end." After Thorn left, Lena turned to Caleb. 6 weeks is tight." "I know. And having his trainer watching us the whole time, I know that too." Caleb ran a hand through his hair. "But this could be exactly what we need. Proof that we're legitimate. That we're not just lucky amateurs. Or it could destroy us if we fail. Then we don't fail." The colt arrived 3 days later, and Caleb understood immediately why 5 trainers had given up. The animal was beautiful. Bay coat, perfect conformation, the kind of horse that should have been easy to work with. But the moment anyone approached him, he'd rear and strike out with his front hooves, eyes rolling back in terror. Thorn's trainer, a weathered man named Dutch, set up camp near their barn. He watched everything with sharp eyes and took notes in a small leather journal. "Day 1, he announced, as if this were a scientific experiment. "Let's see what you've got." Lena spent the first 3 days just observing the colt without trying to touch him. She'd bring his feed, change his water, talk to him in that low, steady voice she used with all the difficult cases. The colt would press himself into the far corner of his pen, shaking. "This is your plan?" Dutch asked on day 4. "Stand around and talk?" "I'm learning his language," Lena replied calmly. "Every horse communicates differently. I need to understand what he's saying before I can respond." Dutch snorted. "In my day, we just broke them." "How'd that work out for this one?" Caleb asked. The trainer's expression darkened, but he said nothing. By the end of the first week, Lena had identified the problem. The colt wasn't aggressive. He was terrified. Specifically, he was terrified of people standing on his left side. Some trauma, probably from his early handling, had convinced him that danger came from the left. "Watch," she told Caleb and Dutch. She approached the colt from the right side, moving slowly. The horse's ears flicked toward her, but he didn't rear. She got within 5 feet, then 3. Finally, she was able to touch his neck. From the left side, he would have been striking at her by now. "Interesting," Dutch muttered, scribbling in his journal. Over the next 2 weeks, Lena worked exclusively from the right side, building trust inch by inch. She taught the colt that human touch didn't always mean pain, that her voice meant safety, that standing still brought relief instead of punishment. Caleb watched her work with a mixture of admiration and frustration. She made it look effortless, but he knew the hours of study behind every decision. The way she read the horse's smallest signals, an ear twitch, a shift in weight, a change in breathing. He could never do what she did, and that truth sat heavy in his chest. "You're brooding," Lena said one night as they prepared for bed. "I'm thinking. About how I'm better with horses than you?" He looked at her sharply. "How did you—" "Because I know you." She sat on the edge of their bed. "And because you get this look whenever someone praises my work. Like you're happy for me, but also a little bit broken." "I'm not broken." "No, but you're struggling." She patted the space beside her. "Talk to me." Caleb sat, staring at his hands. "When we started this, I thought we'd be equals. But every day, it becomes clearer that you're the talent, and I'm just here." "That's not true, isn't it? You're the one training the horses. You're the one clients ask for specifically now. Dutch barely talks to me. He only cares about watching you work." "So? So I'm supposed to be your husband, your partner, and instead I feel like I'm just taking up space." Lena was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood and pulled him to his feet. "Come with me." She led him outside to the training ring, where the colt stood in the darkness. The horse's ears perked at their approach. "You see that horse?" Lena asked. "Obviously. 3 weeks ago, he would have tried to kill us for being this close. Now he's calm, curious even." She turned to face Caleb. "You know why? Because you're good at this." "No, because we're good at this. Together." She took his hand. "Yes, I do the direct training, But you're the one who negotiated with Thorne, who convinced him to give us a chance. You're the one who handles Dutch when he gets too critical, who runs interference so I can focus on the work. You're the one who believed we could do this when I was ready to give up. That's not the same. It's exactly the same. You think Phantom would be who he is if you hadn't spent those first months refusing to quit? You think we'd have any of this? She gestured at their ranch. If you hadn't pushed us to take risks I was too scared to take? Caleb wanted to argue, but she wasn't finished. I'm good with horses, Lena continued. I know that, but you're good with people, including me. You see potential where I see problems. You make me brave enough to try things I'd never attempt alone. She squeezed his hands. Stop measuring yourself against what I can do. Start recognizing what you bring that I can't. Which is? Hope, she said simply. Vision. The absolute stubborn refusal to let the world tell us no. She smiled. You think that's worth less than being able to train a horse? It's worth everything. Something in Caleb's chest loosened. Not all the way. Old insecurities didn't disappear that easily, but enough to let him breathe again. I don't deserve you, he said. Probably not. Lena grinned. Good thing you're stuck with me anyway. The breakthrough with the colt came in week 4. Lena had been working on desensitizing his left side, using tiny increments of pressure and release. One morning, she was able to stand on his left without him panicking. Dutch watched with his arms crossed. Now what? You've got 2 weeks to get him rideable. 2 weeks is plenty, Lena said with a confidence Caleb envied. She was right. By the end of week 5, the colt accepted a saddle from both sides. By day 3 of week 6, Lena rode him around the training ring while Dutch watched in silence. On the final day, Thorne himself returned. He stood at the fence while Lena put the colt through his paces. Walk, trot, canter, all smooth as glass. Well, Thorne said when she was done, I'll be damned. Satisfied? Caleb asked. More than satisfied. Thorne stroked his beard. Dutch, you get all that documented? Every day, Dutch replied. He looked at Lena with something approaching respect. Never seen anyone work like that. Patient as a saint. Not a saint, Lena said, dismounting. Just someone who actually listens to what the horse is trying to say. Thorne paid them double what he'd promised. Consider it an investment, he said, because I'm sending you 3 more horses next month and I'm telling everyone I know about what you did here. After he left, Caleb and Lena stood in their yard, holding a bank draft that represented more money than they'd seen in their lives. We did it, Caleb said. Yeah. Lena looked dazed. We really did. That night, they celebrated with a bottle of whiskey Caleb had been saving. They sat on their cabin steps, passing the bottle back and forth, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. Can I tell you something? Lena asked, her words slightly slurred. Anything. When we got married, I thought it would be temporary. Thought you'd leave as soon as you found a way out. She took another drink. I was preparing myself for it, building walls so it wouldn't hurt as much when you went. I'm not going anywhere, Caleb said. I know that now. But back then? She shook her head. Back then I thought I was just a placeholder, the ugly daughter you got stuck with until something better came along. You were never ugly, never a placeholder. You say that now, but in the beginning, I was an idiot, Caleb interrupted, chasing a fantasy, ignoring what was right in front of me. He took the bottle, set it aside, and turned to face her fully. You want to know when I fell in love with you? Lena's breath caught. You never said... I know. I'm saying it now. He touched her face gently. It was gradual. Started with respect, watching you work with Phantom. Grew into admiration when you kept us alive through that first winter. Turned into something deeper every time you saw through my bullshit and called me on it. He smiled. By the time I realized what it was, I was already gone. Completely, stupidly in love with you. Tears streamed down Lena's face. You mean that? Every word. He kissed her softly. I love you, Lena Rourke. Not because I'm stuck with you. Not because you're useful or talented or because you saved my ass more times than I can count. I love you because you're you, and I can't imagine my life without you in it. Lena kissed him back, and it was different from that first kiss in the barn. Deeper, more certain. The kiss of 2 people who'd fought through hell together and come out stronger. When they finally broke apart, Both breathless, Lena laughed through her tears. We should probably go inside. Probably. But they stayed on the steps a while longer, wrapped in each other, watching the stars and feeling like maybe, finally, they'd built something that couldn't be taken away. The success with Thorne's horses opened floodgates. By fall, they had a waiting list 3 months long. They hired 2 ranch hands to help with the daily work, built a second barn, expanded their corrals. The rocky land that was supposed to break them became the foundation of something remarkable. But growth brought new challenges. Clients who tried to negotiate down their fees, trainers who resented their methods, and always the whispers from Dust Hollow about how the fat daughter and the broke drifter had somehow made it work. Let them talk, Lena said when Caleb complained about it. We know what we built. That's what matters. Still, Caleb found himself wanting validation from the one person who'd never given it, Sheriff Hargrove. He rode to the main house one afternoon in October, ostensibly to discuss business. Hargrove received him on the porch, the same place where this had all begun nearly 2 years earlier. Caleb, Hargrove's greeting was cool. To what do I owe the visit? Wanted to update you on our progress, Caleb said, hating how much he wanted this man's approval. I've heard. Whole county's talking about your little operation. Hargrove sipped his coffee. Impressive, I suppose. For what it is. For what it is, Caleb repeated. You mean for something built on land you thought was worthless? I mean for something built on luck and my daughter's talent. Hargrove's eyes were hard. Don't mistake success for vindication, boy. You're doing well now, but that could change tomorrow. Everything you have could disappear. Is that a threat? It's reality. Hargrove stood. You came here chasing a dream above your station. You got my least valuable daughter instead. Now you're trying to prove you didn't get cheated, but we both know the truth. What truth is that? That you settled. That every time you look at Lena, some part of you remembers what you really wanted. Hargrove smiled coldly. I see it in your eyes. The wondering. What would life have been like with Sarah, with Margaret? Better, probably. The words hit their target, activating every insecurity Caleb thought he'd conquered. Because there was a tiny voice in his head, small but persistent, that sometimes wondered the same thing. You're wrong, Caleb said, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? Hargrove moved closer. You think I don't know how this works? You think I don't understand ambition? You married Lena because you had no choice. You're making the best of it now because you're stubborn. But don't pretend it's what you wanted. It's what I want now, because it's all you have. Hargrove's voice dropped to something almost gentle, which made it worse. Look, I don't blame you. Lena's useful, I'll give her that. Good head for business, better with horses than anyone I've seen. But useful isn't the same as desirable, and you know that as well as I do. Caleb rode home in silence, Hargrove's words echoing in his head. He told himself they were lies, manipulations from a cruel man trying to poison his happiness. But doubt, once planted, grows fast. Lena was in the barn when he returned, working with a new arrival, a mare that refused to load into trailers. She smiled when she saw him. How'd it go with my father? Fine, Caleb lied. Her smile faded. What did he say? Nothing important. Caleb, I said it was nothing. His voice came out sharper than intended, and Lena flinched. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Lena went back to work without another word, and Caleb walked to the cabin alone. That night they barely spoke. Caleb knew he was being unfair, letting Hargrove's poison affect him. But he couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, buried beneath his love for Lena, was a regret he'd never fully confronted. The regret of not getting what he'd originally wanted. It festered over the next few days. Caleb found himself watching Lena with new eyes, looking for flaws he'd stopped seeing. Her size, which he'd learned to appreciate, suddenly seemed more noticeable. Her bluntness, which he'd valued, felt abrasive. Her confidence with horses highlighted his own inadequacies. He hated himself for it. Hated that Hargrove could still get under his skin, but he couldn't seem to stop. What's wrong? Lena asked one evening. Nothing. Don't lie to me. You've been strange since you saw my father. She set down her dinner fork. What did he say to you? Just the usual, that we're not as successful as we think, that it could all fall apart. And you believed him? Caleb stopped. I don't know. Lena's expression shifted to something Caleb couldn't quite read. Hurt, maybe, or resignation. I see, she said quietly. What do you see? That you're having doubts. About us. About this. She gestured vaguely at their life. Maybe about me. That's not. Don't. She held up a hand. I've seen that look before. The one that says you're wondering if you made a mistake. If you should have fought harder for Sarah, or Margaret, or anyone besides me. Lena, that's not fair. No, it's not fair. None of this is fair. Her voice rose. I fell in love with you, Caleb. Actually, genuinely in love with someone who I knew might never feel the same way. And I made peace with that because I thought what we had was enough. But clearly it's not. I told you I loved you. You told me you loved me when we were drunk and celebrating. But what about now? When things are hard and my father's in your head and you're remembering all the reasons you didn't want me in the first place? The words hung between them, sharp and cutting. I do love you, Caleb said, and he meant it. But even he could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Lena heard it too. She stood, her chair scraping against the floor. I'm going to stay in the barn tonight, give you some space to figure out what you actually want. You don't have to, yes I do. She grabbed her coat. Because I deserve better than someone who's still not sure if I'm good enough. She left, and Caleb sat alone in the cabin they'd built together, surrounded by everything they'd accomplished, and felt like the biggest fool alive. Caleb didn't sleep that night. He lay in their bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every moment, every choice that had led him here. The cabin felt too big without Lena in it, and the silence pressed down on him like a physical weight. He kept hearing Hargrove's voice. You settled. Kept seeing the doubt in Lena's eyes when she'd asked if he was having second thoughts. Kept feeling the sick twist in his gut that came from knowing he'd hurt the one person who'd never deserved it. Around 3 a.m, he gave up on sleep and went outside. The November air was cold enough to burn his lungs, but he welcomed the clarity it brought. He could see lamplight in the barn. Lena was awake too. He should go to her, apologize, fix this before it became unfixable. But he didn't move. Because Hargrove's words had exposed something Caleb hadn't wanted to acknowledge. A tiny, shameful part of him that still wondered what if. What if he'd walked away that day in town? What if he'd demanded Sarah or Margaret like he'd originally planned? What if he'd chosen the easy path instead of the complicated one? The thoughts made him feel sick, but he couldn't stop having them. When dawn broke, Caleb was still sitting on the porch steps, no closer to answers than he'd been hours before. Lena emerged from the barn looking exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. She saw him and stopped. You're up early, she said, her voice carefully neutral. Didn't sleep. Me neither. She moved toward the cabin but didn't come closer to him. I need to check on the new mare, then I'll make breakfast. Lena, wait. She paused, not looking at him. I'm sorry, Caleb said, for last night, for making you feel like you're not enough. Are you though? Sorry? Now she looked at him, and her eyes were hard. Or are you just sorry you got caught having doubts? I'm sorry I let my father-in-law get in my head. That's not an answer. Lena crossed her arms. Do you regret marrying me? Be honest. Caleb opened his mouth, ready to say no. Of course not. Never. But Lena held up a hand. Don't answer right away. Actually, think about it. Her voice was steady, but there was pain underneath. Because I need to know if I'm building a life with someone who wants me, or someone who's just making the best of a bad situation. She went inside before he could respond, and Caleb sat there feeling like the world's biggest coward. The next few days passed in tense politeness. They worked together because they had to. Clients didn't care about marital problems. But at night, Lena slept in the barn, and Caleb slept alone, and the distance between them grew wider. On the 4th day, Sarah showed up at their ranch. Caleb was repairing a fence when he saw her riding up, and his heart did something complicated. She was as beautiful as ever, golden hair catching the sunlight, sitting her horse with practiced grace. Everything he'd thought he wanted 2 years ago. Sarah, he said, surprised, what brings you out here? Can't a girl visit her sister? Sarah dismounted, and Caleb noticed she moved with less confidence than he remembered. Is Lena around? In the barn. I'll get her. Actually, I wanted to talk to you first. Sarah's smile was strained. Can we walk? They walked toward the far pasture, where Phantom grazed peacefully. Sarah was quiet for a while, and Caleb found himself acutely aware of how different this felt from being with Lena. With Lena, silences were comfortable. With Sarah, they felt like tests he was failing. "Father said you visited last week," Sarah said finally. "Briefly. He's been insufferable since then, going on about how you and Lena are heading for disaster." She glanced at him. "Are you?" "I don't know," Caleb admitted, because lying to Sarah seemed pointless. "He does that, gets in people's heads, makes them question everything." Sarah stopped walking, turning to face him. "He did it to me about Thomas." Thomas was the man Sarah had married 6 months ago, a banker's son from Denver with family money and social standing. Caleb had heard it was a good match. "What do you mean?" "I love Thomas. Still do, I think. But Father spent months telling me I could do better, that I was settling, that my beauty was wasted on someone so ordinary." Sarah laughed bitterly. "Now I'm married to a man I'm never sure about, and I can't tell if that's because he's wrong for me or because Father poisoned the well." Caleb stared at her. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I see you making the same mistake." Sarah's eyes were sad. "Lena's the best of us, Caleb. Always has been. She's smart, capable, kind when the rest of us are just playing at it. And she loves you in a way I've never loved anyone, completely, without reservation." "She told you that?" "She didn't have to. I saw it at your wedding, saw how she looked at you even when everyone was laughing at her." Sarah touched his arm gently. "Don't let Father ruin what you have because he can't stand seeing Lena happy." "It's not that simple, isn't it?" Sarah's voice sharpened. "You have a woman who sees past all your flaws, who built a life with you from nothing, who makes you better just by being near you, and you're throwing it away because Father made you remember you once wanted something prettier." The words hit like a punch because they were true. Painfully, obviously true. "I don't know how to fix it," Caleb said quietly. "Figure it out, fast." Sarah remounted her horse. "Because Lena won't wait forever, and once she's done, she's done. Trust me on that." She rode away, leaving Caleb standing in the field with Phantom and a growing sense of panic. He found Lena in the training ring, working with a young gelding that spooked at shadows. She saw him approach but didn't stop working. "We need to talk," Caleb said. "I'm busy." "Lena, please." She brought the gelding to a halt, handed him off to one of their ranch hands, and climbed out of the ring. Her expression was guarded. "What?" "Sarah was here." "I know. She found me after she talked to you." Lena wiped sweat from her forehead. "Said some things that were probably meant to help, but mostly just made me feel worse." "What did she say?" "That you're an idiot. That I should be patient with you. That love is hard and marriage is harder." Lena's laugh was hollow. "As if I didn't already know that." Caleb took a breath. "She also said you won't wait forever." "She's right about that." "How long do I have?" The question hung between them. Lena studied him for a long moment, and Caleb saw exhaustion in her eyes. Not just from the sleepless nights, but from something deeper. The exhaustion of being uncertain about someone she'd chosen to trust completely. "I don't know," she said finally. "But Caleb, I need you to understand something. I can handle hard work. I can handle money problems, difficult horses, people talking behind my back. I've been handling that my whole life." Her voice cracked slightly. "What I can't handle is wondering if my husband wishes I was someone else." "I don't." "Don't you?" She moved closer, and Caleb could see tears forming. "Be honest. When you look at me, do you ever think about what Sarah or Margaret would have been like? Do you ever wonder if your life would be easier, happier, if you'd married one of them instead?" Caleb wanted to lie. Wanted to say no, never, not once. But Lena had asked for honesty, and she deserved at least that much. "Sometimes," he whispered. "Not often, not even consciously most of the time. But yeah, sometimes the thought crosses my mind." Lena flinched like he'd struck her. "Okay, but that doesn't mean it means exactly what I thought it meant." She stepped back. "You're still not sure about us, about me. And I can't keep living like this, Caleb, waiting for the day you finally decide if I'm worth choosing." "You are worth choosing. I did choose you." "No." Her voice was firm. "You defended me. You married me because it was the right thing to do. But choosing? Actually wanting me instead of just making the best of the situation? She shook her head. I don't think you've ever really done that. That's not fair. I told you I loved you, and I believe you do, in your way. But love isn't enough if there's always a part of you wondering if you made a mistake. Lena wiped her eyes roughly. I need some time, away from here, from you, to figure out what I want. Caleb's stomach dropped. What does that mean? It means I'm going to stay with Margaret for a while. She's got that place in town, plenty of room. I'll still come work the horses during the day, but I can't sleep here anymore. Can't keep pretending everything's fine when it's not. Lena, don't do this. I'm not doing anything except protecting myself. She met his eyes. Figure out what you want, Caleb. Really want. Not what you think you should want. Not what's convenient or right or expected. What you actually want. I want you. Then prove it. She turned and walked toward the barn, because right now, all I'm hearing are words. Lena moved out that afternoon. Caleb watched her pack her few belongings into a bag and tried to find something to say that would make her stay. But every argument died in his throat because she was right. About all of it. That night, alone in the cabin for the first time since those early months of their marriage, Caleb forced himself to confront the question he'd been avoiding. Did he really want Lena? Or was he just comfortable with her? He thought about Sarah, beautiful, graceful Sarah who'd never challenged him or called him on his nonsense. Marrying her would have been easy. She would have made him look good, given him status, asked for nothing more than financial security in return. But would she have taught him patience like Lena had? Would she have pushed him to be better, to think bigger, to question his assumptions? Would she have built a business with him from nothing, or would she have expected him to provide while she managed the household? Then he thought about Margaret, clever Margaret with her books and sharp wit. She would have been intellectually stimulating, certainly. Conversations would never have been boring. But would she have worked beside him in the fields? Would she have stayed up all night with a sick horse, or negotiated with difficult clients, or seen potential in 20 acres of rocky soil? And finally, inevitably, he thought about Lena, about the woman who'd saved his life without him even realizing he needed saving, who'd turned his arrogance into patience, his desperation into purpose, his shallow dreams into something solid and real. He thought about her hands, scarred and capable, her voice, steady and sure when everything else was chaos, her laugh, rare but genuine, the way she looked at him sometimes, like he was more than he'd ever thought he could be. And Caleb realized with sudden, crushing clarity that he was the world's biggest fool, because he hadn't settled. Lena hadn't been the consolation prize. She'd been the only prize worth having, and he'd been too blind to see it. But knowing that and proving it were two different things. The next morning, Caleb rode into town and found Margaret. She lived in a small house near the library, surrounded by books and the comfortable chaos of someone who valued ideas over appearances. I need your help, Caleb said when she opened the door. Margaret raised an eyebrow. Does this have anything to do with my sister sleeping in my spare room and crying into her pillow at night? Yeah, it does. Then you'd better come in. They sat in her parlor and Caleb told her everything. About Hargrove's words, his doubts, the fight with Lena. About how he'd realized too late what he actually had. Margaret listened without interrupting. When he was done, she was quiet for a long moment. You're an idiot, she said finally. I know, but you're a fixable kind of idiot, which is something. She stood pacing. Here's what you need to understand about Lena. She spent her entire life being overlooked. Being the daughter father was ashamed of, the sister Sarah and I unconsciously dismissed. She learned early that she wasn't going to get chosen, so she stopped expecting it. I chose her. You defended her. That's not the same thing. Margaret turned to face him. Choosing her means seeing all her options and picking her anyway. Means wanting her not because she's useful or convenient, but because she's her. And Caleb, I don't think you've ever made her feel like that. The words stung because they were accurate. How do I fix it? I can't tell you that, but I can tell you that whatever you do, it needs to be real. Lena can spot insincerity a mile away. She won't accept grand gestures or pretty words. She needs action. Proof that you're choosing her, not just accepting your circumstances. What kind of proof? Margaret smiled slightly. If I have to tell you that, you're more of an idiot than I thought. Caleb spent the next week thinking about what proof looked like. He went through the motions at the ranch, fed the horses, worked with clients, kept the operation running. But his mind was elsewhere, turning over possibilities and discarding them one by one. Flowers? Meaningless. Lena would see right through them. A speech? Words had already failed him too many times. A gift? What could he give her that she didn't already have or couldn't get herself? He was mucking out stalls on the 8th day when the answer hit him so hard he dropped his pitchfork. It wasn't about giving Lena something. It was about giving up something that mattered. Caleb went straight to the cabin and pulled out the metal box where they kept important papers. At the bottom was a document he hadn't looked at since the day Hargrove had drawn it up, the deed to their 20 acres. It was in Caleb's name only. Hargrove had insisted on it, and Caleb had been too desperate to argue. The land, the ranch, everything they'd built, legally, it all belonged to him. Lena owned nothing. If Caleb left tomorrow, she'd have no claim to any of it. All her work, her talent, her contributions, legally invisible. It had never occurred to him to change it. Married couples shared property, didn't they? What did it matter whose name was on the deed? But it mattered. It mattered because Lena had no security beyond his goodwill. It mattered because she'd built this place as much as he had, but couldn't prove it. It mattered because choosing her meant making her an equal partner, not just in practice, but in law. Caleb rode into town and found the lawyer who'd handled their property documents. The man looked surprised to see him. "Mr. Rourke, what can I do for you?" "I need to change a deed. Make it joint ownership instead of sole." The lawyer pulled out the relevant papers. "That's unusual. Most men prefer to maintain control of—" "I don't care what most men prefer. Can you do it or not?" "Of course. It'll take a few days to process the paperwork. You and your wife will both need to sign." "That's fine." Caleb paused. "And I want to add something else. If anything happens to me, everything goes to her. No questions, no claims from any other party. It's all hers." The lawyer made notes. "You're certain about this? Once these papers are filed, I'm certain." When the documents were ready, Caleb brought them to Margaret's house. Lena answered the door, looking tired and thinner than she'd been a week ago. "Caleb, what are you doing here?" "I need you to sign something." Her expression closed off. "If this is divorce papers—" "It's not." He held out the folder. "Just look at them, please." Lena took the papers warily. Caleb watched her eyes move over the text, saw the moment she understood what she was reading. Her hand went to her mouth. "You're putting my name on the deed?" "Half of everything. The land, the ranch, the business, all of it. It should have been that way from the start." "Caleb, I don't understand." "I'm choosing you," he interrupted. "Actually, legally, irrevocably choosing you. Not because I'm stuck with you, not because it's the right thing to do, but because you're my partner, and partners share equally in what they build." Lena's hands shook slightly. "This is a lot of money, a lot of property. If we separate—" "Then half of it's yours. That's the point." Caleb stepped closer. "I want you to have security that doesn't depend on me being a good person or keeping my promises. I want you to own what you've earned, and I want you to know that I trust you completely, even if you can't trust me right now." Tears spilled down Lena's cheeks. "Why?" "Because you were right. I needed to figure out what I actually wanted. And what I want is you, not the idea of you, not the convenience of you. You, Lena. The woman who's too blunt and too stubborn and too good at everything she does. The woman who calls me on my nonsense and makes me want to be better. The woman I'm stupid in love with even when I'm too much of an idiot to show it properly." He took her hands carefully, mindful that she might pull away. "I can't undo the doubts I had. Can't take back the fact that I let your father get in my head. But I can show you that I'm done wondering what if. This is what I want. You are what I want. And if it takes me the rest of my life to prove that, then that's what I'll do." Lena looked at the papers, then at him, then back at the papers. "This doesn't fix everything." "I know. I'm still hurt, still angry that you questioned us." "I know that too. And I don't know if I can trust that you won't do it again." "Then I'll earn your trust back." Caleb squeezed her hands gently. "However long it takes. Whatever it takes. I'm not going anywhere, Lena, and neither is your half of our ranch." She laughed through her tears, and the sound made Caleb's chest ache with hope. "You really mean this?" "Every word, every clause, every signature." He smiled. "You taught me how to train horses by earning their trust one day at a time. So that's what I'm going to do with you. Show up. Be consistent. Prove I mean what I say. Lena was quiet for a long moment, searching his face for something. Whatever she found must have been enough because she slowly nodded. Okay. Okay. I'll sign the papers and I'll come home. She held up a hand before he could celebrate. But Caleb, we're doing this differently. No more assumptions. No more taking each other for granted. We talk about the hard stuff, even when it's uncomfortable. Agreed. And you go to therapy. That surprised him. Therapy? There's a counselor in the next town over. Helps people work through family issues, past trauma, all that. You've got wounds from your father, from poverty, from feeling like you're not enough. Those need dealing with, or they'll keep poisoning us. Caleb wanted to argue that he was fine, that talking to a stranger about feelings seemed excessive. But Lena was looking at him with hope and determination, and he realized she was asking him to work on himself the same way they worked on broken horses, with patience, with commitment, with the belief that healing was possible. Okay, he said, I'll go. Really? Really? If that's what it takes to be the husband you deserve, I'll do it. Lena set down the papers and pulled him into a hug. Caleb wrapped his arms around her and felt something settle in his chest that had been unsettled for weeks. This was what choosing looked like. Not the easy affection of new love, but the hard work of committed love. The kind that survived doubts and fights and outside influences because both people decided it was worth fighting for. I love you, Caleb whispered into her hair. I love you too, Lena whispered back. But you're still sleeping on the couch for a week. Fair enough. They signed the papers that afternoon, with Margaret as witness. The lawyer filed them the next day, and just like that, Lena went from owning nothing to owning half of everything they'd built. True to her word, Caleb slept on the couch for a week. Not as punishment, Lena explained, but as a reset. A way to remember that sleeping beside each other was a privilege, not a right. He started seeing the counselor twice a week. The first few sessions were awkward. Talking about his feelings with a stranger made his skin crawl. But slowly, session by session, he began to understand the patterns that had shaped him, the fear of poverty that made him chase status, the absent father that made him desperate for approval, the belief that he had to be perfect to deserve love. You've been running from inadequacy your whole life, the counselor said during their 5th session. And when you married Lena, part of you saw it as proof that you'd failed, that you weren't good enough for the beautiful daughter. But that's not true, Caleb argued. I know that. Lena knows that. But does your wounded 12-year-old self know that? The one who watched his father disappear into the mines? The one who promised himself he'd never be poor or powerless or dismissed? The question hit Caleb hard. Because no, that frightened kid inside him didn't know. That kid still thought value came from external validation. Still thought winning meant getting the prettiest prize. How do I fix it? Caleb asked. You don't fix it, you heal it. And healing means accepting that your worth isn't determined by who you marry or what you own. It's inherent, and so is Lena's. It was slow work, that healing. Some days Caleb felt like he was making progress. Other days, old thought patterns would surface, and he'd have to consciously fight them. But he kept showing up, kept doing the work. Because Lena was doing the same thing, learning to trust again, to believe that she was chosen and not just accepted. By winter, they'd found a new rhythm. Not the tense politeness of their first months or the easy comfort before the fight. Something deeper, more intentional. They made time to talk every night, really talk, about how they were feeling and what they needed. They worked together during the day but carved out separate time too, Lena with her horses, Caleb with the business side. And slowly, the distance between them closed. One evening in January, almost exactly 2 years after they'd married, Caleb and Lena sat on their porch watching the sun set over their land. It was freezing cold, but they'd bundled up in blankets and brought out hot coffee. You know what I was thinking about today? Lena asked. What's that? That day you rode Phantom into town, when my father humiliated both of us. She smiled slightly. I thought my life was over, thought I'd end up in a loveless marriage with a man who resented me forever. And now? Now I think maybe it was the beginning instead of the end. She leaned against his shoulder. Don't get me wrong. It's been hard, harder than I expected, but also better, more real. Caleb wrapped an arm around her. I'm sorry I made it harder than it needed to be. We both did. I had my own walls to tear down, my own assumptions to challenge. She looked up at him. But we did it. We're doing it. Yeah, we are. They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Caleb thought about the man he'd been when he arrived in Dust Hollow. Desperate, arrogant, chasing a dream he didn't understand. That man would have seen this moment as failure, would have looked at Lena and seen everything he didn't get. But the man he was now saw clearly. Saw a woman who'd taken his broken pieces and helped him forge them into something stronger. Saw a partner who challenged him and supported him in equal measure. Saw a future built on honesty and hard work and the kind of love that didn't quit when things got difficult. Thank you, Caleb said quietly. For what? For not giving up on me. On us. When you had every reason to. Lena squeezed his hand. Thank you for finally choosing me for real. Best decision I ever made. Even better than taming Phantom? Phantom was your achievement. You just let me take credit for it. Caleb smiled. Choosing you was all me, and I'd do it again every single day. They went inside eventually, driven by the cold, but Caleb paused at the threshold, looking back at their land, their barn, their life. Everything they'd built from nothing, and he felt something he'd been chasing his whole life without knowing what it was. Not validation, not status, not proof of worth, just peace. The simple, profound peace of being exactly where he was supposed to be, with exactly who he was supposed to be with. Lena called his name from inside, and Caleb smiled. He closed the door on the cold night and the old dreams and stepped into the warmth of the life he'd chosen, the life that had chosen him back. Spring came early that year, bringing with it changes neither Caleb nor Lena had anticipated. Their reputation had spread far enough that clients came from as far as 3 territories away, and the waiting list stretched into summer. They hired 4 more ranch hands and built a 3rd barn to accommodate the demand. Money stopped being a worry. They paid off debts, bought better equipment, expanded their pastures. The rocky land Hargrove had given them as a joke now supported nearly 50 horses at any given time, and the training operation had become one of the most respected in the region. But success brought complications beyond just logistics. We need to talk about something, Lena said one morning over breakfast. She had that look on her face, the one that meant she'd been thinking about something serious for a while. What's on your mind? People keep asking about apprenticeships, young folks who want to learn our methods. She pushed eggs around her plate. I've been turning them away because we're already stretched thin, but maybe we shouldn't be. Caleb set down his coffee. You want to start teaching? I want to pass this on. What we've learned, what we've figured out. Lena looked up at him. We almost lost all of this because of secrets and assumptions and people not knowing better ways. What if we could change that? What if we could teach people to see horses, and maybe each other, differently? It was ambitious. It would mean restructuring their entire operation, taking on students who'd need time and attention they barely had to spare. But Caleb saw the light in Lena's eyes and knew this mattered to her in a way that went beyond business. Okay, he said, let's do it. Just like that? Just like that. He smiled. You're the visionary. I'm just here to make your visions possible. That's not true, and you know it. Maybe, but I like the division of labor. He reached across the table. Besides, you're right. If we keep this to ourselves, it dies with us. If we teach it, it grows. They started small, 2 apprentices that first season. A young woman named Beth, who'd been dismissed by every other trainer for being too small, and a boy named James, whose stutter made most people assume he was simple. Both had been turned away from traditional training programs. Both thrived under Lena's instruction. Caleb watched his wife work with them and saw her come alive in new ways. She was patient with their mistakes, insightful about their strengths, and absolutely uncompromising about the core principle: respect the horse, understand the horse, earn the horse's trust. You're a natural teacher, Caleb told her one evening after Beth had successfully worked with a horse that had bitten her 3 times the week before. I'm just showing them what you showed me, Lena replied, that there's always another way to look at a problem. I showed you that? You did. When you kept trying with Phantom even after you should have given up. When you saw potential in land everyone else called worthless. When you chose me when everyone said you were crazy to. She smiled. You taught me that conventional wisdom is usually just fear dressed up as practicality. Caleb pulled her close, still amazed that this woman saw him so clearly and loved him anyway. The apprenticeship program grew. By the end of that year, they had 6 students. By the next spring, 12. Word spread about the ranch that took in outcasts and misfits and turned them into skilled trainers. But growth meant visibility, and visibility eventually caught Sheriff Hargrove's attention again. He showed up unannounced on a Tuesday afternoon in late summer, 3 years after Caleb and Lena's wedding. Caleb was in the office working through invoices when one of the ranch hands knocked on the door. "Sheriff's here, asking for you and Mrs. Rourke." Caleb's stomach tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "Tell him we'll meet him in the yard." He found Lena in the training ring with 2 apprentices. She saw his expression and immediately knew something was wrong. "My father?" "Yeah." She nodded once, said something to her students, and joined him. They walked to the yard together, and Caleb felt her hand slip into his. The gesture steadied him. Hargrove stood beside his horse, surveying their operation with an expression Caleb couldn't quite read. Not angry, exactly, but not pleased either. "Sheriff," Lena said, her voice cool, "what brings you out here? Can't a father visit his daughter? You're not here as a father. You never are." She crossed her arms. "What do you want?" Hargrove's jaw tightened at the directness, but he recovered quickly. "Heard you're running some kind of school now, teaching my methods without permission." "Your methods?" Lena's laugh was sharp. "You don't have methods. You have force and intimidation. What we teach here is the opposite of everything you stand for." "That's so." Hargrove stepped closer, and Caleb felt Lena tense beside him. "Because it seems to me you're using my family name to build your reputation, trading on the Hargrove legacy to—" "Stop!" Caleb's voice cut through the air. "You don't get to do this." Hargrove turned to him, eyebrows raised. "Excuse me? You heard me. You don't get to show up here after 3 years of silence and claim credit for what we've built." Caleb moved to stand beside Lena. "You gave us worthless land and expected us to fail. You humiliated Lena in front of the whole town. You've done nothing but try to poison our marriage and our business since day one. So no, you don't get to take credit now that we've succeeded. Careful, boy. I'm still the law in this county. Then act like it. Enforce actual laws instead of harassing your daughter because you can't stand seeing her happy." Caleb felt years of suppressed anger rising. "You want to know the truth? Lena's a better trainer than you ever were. She's built something here that actually helps people instead of just breaking them. And she did it despite you, not because of you." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the horses seemed to be holding their breath. Hargrove's face had gone red. "You've got some nerve." "He's right." Lena's voice was quiet but firm. "About all of it. You've been cruel to me my entire life, Father. Made me feel worthless, invisible, like my only value was in being useful to you or staying out of your way." She stepped forward. "But I'm done letting you define me. I know what I'm worth now. I know what I've built, and I don't need your approval anymore." Something flickered in Hargrove's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or hurt, but his voice stayed hard. "Fine. You want to reject your family, your heritage, that's your choice. But don't come crawling back when this all falls apart." "It won't fall apart," Caleb said, "because it's built on something you've never understood. Partnership. Mutual respect. The belief that people are worth investing in, not just using." Hargrove mounted his horse. Before he rode away, he looked at Lena one more time. "You could have been something, could have married well, lived comfortably. Instead, you're out here playing in the dirt with broken horses and broken people." "You're right," Lena said, and her voice was steady. "I could have been what you wanted, but I chose to be what I wanted instead, and I've never been happier." Hargrove rode off without another word, and Caleb watched him go with a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Not for himself, but for Lena, who'd just cut ties with the only father she'd ever known. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "Yeah." Lena wiped her eyes. "Yeah, I think I am. It needed to be said. He might not come around." "I know. And that's his loss, not mine." She turned to face Caleb. "I have everything I need right here." The confrontation with Hargrove seemed to free something in Lena. She threw herself into the apprenticeship program with renewed energy, developing curriculum, setting standards, creating a structure that could outlast them both. "I want this to be a real school eventually," she told Caleb one night. "Not just apprenticeships, but formal training, certification, a place where people can learn to work with animals and people in ways that actually heal instead of harm. That's ambitious. So was taming Phantom. So was making this ranch work. She looked at him. We've done impossible things before. Why not this? Why not indeed? Over the next 2 years, they built the foundation for what would become the Rourke Training Institute. They brought in guest instructors, developed written materials, created a curriculum that combined practical horsemanship with the psychological understanding that made their methods unique. Students came from everywhere. Some were like Beth and James, dismissed by others, looking for a chance. Others were experienced trainers who'd hit walls with their conventional methods and wanted to learn something new. A few were people with no horse experience at all, just drawn by the philosophy of patient, respectful teaching. The ranch became a community, a place where people who'd been told they weren't good enough came to discover they were exactly enough. And Caleb watched Lena flourish in ways he'd never imagined. She was still blunt, still stubborn, still too honest for polite society. But she'd found her place, her purpose, her people. One evening in their 5th year of marriage, Caleb found her in the barn with Phantom. The stallion was older now, his black coat shot through with gray, but still magnificent. Lena was brushing him with long, steady strokes, and both of them looked peaceful. "Remember when he tried to kill me?" Caleb asked, leaning against the stall door. "I remember when you tried to break him," Lena corrected. "And how that went." "Fair point." Caleb came into the stall, running a hand along Phantom's neck. The horse whickered softly. "Hard to believe this is the same animal." "He's not. Neither are you." Lena set down the brush. "We're all different than we were. That's the point, isn't it? Growth, change, becoming who we're meant to be." "Who are you meant to be?" She considered the question seriously. "Someone who helps others find their strength. Someone who sees potential where others see problems. Someone who loves completely and demands the same in return." She smiled. "Who are you meant to be?" "Your partner. Your equal. The person who makes your visions possible while you make my life meaningful." Caleb pulled her close. "And maybe that's enough." "It's more than enough. It's everything." They stood there in the barn, surrounded by the life they'd built from nothing, and Caleb felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. This wasn't the life he'd planned, wasn't the dream he'd chased to Dust Hollow all those years ago. It was better. The invitation came in autumn, delivered by a nervous courier who clearly didn't want to be there. Caleb opened it in the office while Lena reviewed training schedules. "What is it?" she asked, seeing his expression. "Your father. He's hosting some kind of county fair. Horse show, demonstrations, the works. He's invited us to participate." Lena took the invitation, reading it carefully. "This is weird. He hasn't spoken to us in 2 years. Maybe he's extending an olive branch? Or setting a trap?" She handed it back. "Either way, I don't think we should go." But Caleb kept looking at the invitation, thinking about something his counselor had said recently. Sometimes closure means facing the thing you've been avoiding. "What if we do go?" he said slowly. "Not because he invited us, but because we choose to, on our terms." "Why would we do that?" "Because running a demonstration at the county fair would be good for the Institute. Because showing people what we do might inspire others to try it. Because—" He paused. "Because maybe it's time to show your father and everyone else in Dust Hollow exactly what they missed out on when they dismissed us." Lena was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled. "You want to rub their noses in our success?" "Little bit, yeah. I'm in." They spent the next month preparing a demonstration that would showcase their methods. Not just horse training, but the philosophy behind it. They selected 3 students to participate. Beth, now a skilled trainer in her own right, James, who'd overcome his stutter to become one of their best teachers, and a newer student named Maria, who'd been told she was too old to learn anything new at 45. Each would work with a horse that embodied the kind of problem people usually solved with force. A mare that refused to be bridled, a gelding that wouldn't load into trailers, a young stallion that struck out at anyone who approached. The day of the fair dawned clear and cold. Caleb and Lena loaded their horses and students into wagons and made the trip to Dust Hollow for the first time in years. The town had grown, new buildings, new businesses, new faces, but some things hadn't changed. The general store where Caleb had heard about Hargrove's challenge, the church where they'd married, the saloon where men still gathered to gossip and judge. The fairgrounds were packed. Hundreds of people had come from all over the county to see the horse show, and Hargrove stood at the center of it all, playing the benevolent host. He saw them arrive and his expression flickered. Surprise, then something harder to read. "Lena, Caleb," he nodded formally. "Glad you could make it." "We're here to demonstrate," Lena said, equally formal. "Where do you want us?" Hargrove showed them to a large ring at the edge of the grounds. It was a good spot, visible, but not central. A place for novelty acts, not main events. "We've got you scheduled for 2 o'clock, Hargrove said, "after the jumping competition, before the roping demonstration." "That's fine," Caleb replied. He could feel the calculation in Hargrove's placement, late enough that people might be tired, early enough that they wouldn't have built anticipation. A slot designed to minimize impact. They set up anyway. Brought out their horses, their students, their equipment. Word spread that the Rourke Institute was doing something, and people drifted over out of curiosity or boredom or the hope of seeing something fail spectacularly. When 2 o'clock came, a decent crowd had gathered. Caleb stood in the center of the ring and felt his heart hammering. This was it, the moment to show everyone who'd dismissed them, mocked them, bet against them. This was the moment to prove them all wrong. "Afternoon," he called out, and the crowd quieted. "My name's Caleb Rourke, and this is my wife Lena. 5 years ago, we started a ranch on 20 acres of land most people said was worthless. Today, we run the Rourke Training Institute, and we're here to show you a different way of working with horses." He gestured to Beth, who led out the mare that wouldn't be bridled. The horse was already tense, ears back, clearly uncomfortable with the crowd. "This mare's been through 5 owners," Lena explained, taking over. "Each one tried to force a bridle on her, and each one failed. Watch what happens when we try force." Beth approached the mare with a bridle, moving quickly and directly. The horse immediately threw her head up, backing away, eyes rolling. "See that?" Lena asked. "That's fear, panic. The mare's been hurt before and she's learned that bridles mean pain, so she fights." She nodded to Beth. "Now watch what happens when we change our approach." Beth set down the bridle and just stood near the mare, not touching her, not even looking at her directly. She waited. The crowd grew restless, murmuring. This was boring. Nothing was happening. But slowly, gradually, the mare's ears came forward. Her head lowered. She took a step toward Beth, then another. Beth moved then, but differently than before. Slow, careful. She touched the mare's neck, stroked it gently, talked to her in a low voice the crowd couldn't hear. Then, almost casually, she slipped the bridle on. The mare accepted it without a fight. The crowd went quiet. "That took 5 minutes," Lena said into the silence. 5 previous owners spent months trying to force this horse. 5 minutes of patience and understanding solved the problem. That's what we teach at the Institute. James went next with the gelding that wouldn't load. He demonstrated the old way first. Ropes, whips, men yelling and pushing. The horse panicked, nearly hurt himself trying to escape. Then James showed the new way. Breaking the task into tiny steps. Rewarding the smallest progress. Building trust instead of demanding obedience. 10 minutes later, the gelding walked calmly into the trailer. The crowd was watching intently now, murmuring with interest instead of skepticism. Maria took the ring last with the young stallion. She was a large woman, older than most trainers, with gray in her hair and wrinkles around her eyes. The kind of person conventional wisdom said couldn't handle a powerful animal. The stallion tried to intimidate her, rearing and striking out. The crowd gasped, waiting for her to back down. Maria stood her ground. Not fighting, just refusing to be moved. She waited until the stallion's tantrum ended, then approached him with the same patient respect Lena had shown Phantom all those years ago. By the end of her demonstration, the stallion was following Maria around the ring like a devoted dog. The crowd erupted in applause. Caleb looked out in the faces watching them, some shocked, some impressed, some thoughtful. He saw ranchers reevaluating their methods, young people imagining new possibilities, skeptics forced to reconsider their assumptions. And he saw Hargrove, standing at the edge of the ring with an expression that was almost unreadable. Not quite pride, but maybe respect, or at least acknowledgement. After the demonstration, people swarmed them with questions. How did they learn this? Could anyone be taught? What about dangerous horses? What about horses that had been abused? Lena answered patiently, explaining the philosophy, the methods, the institute. Caleb watched her work the crowd, his blunt, honest wife, who'd learned to translate her knowledge into terms others could understand, and felt pride so fierce it almost hurt. As the crowd thinned, Hargrove approached. He looked older than Caleb remembered, weathered by time and maybe regret. "That was impressive," he said to Lena. "What you've built, what you've taught these people." "Thank you," Lena replied cautiously. "I was wrong." The words came out stiff, like they hurt. "About you, about what you could do, about giving you that land and expecting you to fail." He paused. "About a lot of things." Lena's expression softened slightly. "I appreciate you saying that. Don't appreciate it too much. I'm still a stubborn old man who doesn't like being proven wrong." Hargrove managed a small smile. "But I can admit when I am. You've done something remarkable here, Lena, something I never gave you credit for being able to do." "I didn't do it alone." She took Caleb's hand. "We did it together." Hargrove looked at Caleb, and something passed between them. Not friendship, probably never that, but maybe understanding, recognition that they'd both underestimated the woman standing between them. "Take care of her," Hargrove said finally. "Every day," Caleb replied. Hargrove nodded once and walked away. It wasn't reconciliation, exactly, but it was acknowledgement, and maybe that was enough. The ride home was quiet. Caleb and Lena sat in the wagon while their students drove, both lost in thought. "You okay?" Caleb asked. "Yeah, just thinking." Lena leaned against his shoulder. "About how far we've come, how different everything is from what I thought it would be." "Better or worse?" "Better. So much better." She looked up at him. "You know what the best part was? Not my father's apology, not the crowd's reaction. What then? Watching Beth and James and Maria. Seeing them stand in front of all those people and demonstrate what they'd learned. Knowing that we helped them find their confidence, their skills, their place." She smiled. "That's the legacy. Not the ranch or the money or even your stubborn refusal to give up on me. The people we've helped become who they were meant to be." Caleb kissed her forehead. "You know you're going to make me cry, right?" "Good. You've earned some tears, the happy kind." The institute continued to grow. By their 7th year of marriage, they had permanent buildings, a full curriculum, and graduates spreading their methods across 3 territories. Some opened their own training operations. Others became consultants, traveling to ranches and teaching Lena's methods to people who'd never heard of Dust Hollow. The philosophy spread like ripples in water. Patience over force, understanding over dominance, partnership over control. And it worked. Everywhere their graduates went, they proved that there was another way. A better way. One evening in late spring, Caleb and Lena took a rare night off from the institute. They packed a picnic and rode Phantom, still steady despite his age, up to the highest point on their land. From there, they could see everything. The ranch buildings, the training rings, the pastures full of horses, the small cabins where students lived while they learned, the community they'd built from nothing. "Remember when this was just rocky wasteland?" Lena asked. "I remember thinking it was impossible, that your father had given us a death sentence. And now?" Caleb looked at the woman beside him, still blunt, still strong, still the best thing that had ever happened to him, and smiled. "Now I think he gave us exactly what we needed. Not what we wanted, but what we needed. The hard thing. The impossible thing. The thing that forced us to become people who could actually build something worth having." Lena nodded slowly. "I used to resent him for the way he treated me, for making me feel worthless, for offering me as a humiliation instead of a prize." She paused. "But if he'd been kinder, if he'd given you Sarah or Margaret like you wanted, none of this exists. You'd be in some comfortable marriage, probably bored. I'd still be invisible in his house. And all these people we've helped, they'd still be struggling. So you're saying we should thank him?" "No. I'm saying we should thank ourselves for taking what he meant as cruelty and turning it into something beautiful." She took his hand. "For choosing each other even when it was hard. For building this even when everyone said we'd fail. For proving that the things people dismiss, difficult horses, unwanted daughters, impossible dreams, those are often the things most worth fighting for." Caleb pulled her close, and they sat there as the sun set over their impossible, beautiful life. I love you, he said, for exactly who you are. Not despite anything, not because of what you can do or what you've helped me build, just you. Lena, the woman I should have seen clearly from the start but was too blind to recognize. I love you too, Lena replied. The man who learned to see, who chose growth over comfort, who became someone I could actually build a life with instead of just survive beside. They stayed on the hill until stars filled the sky, talking about the future, about expanding the institute, about the students who needed them, about the possibility of writing down Lena's methods so they could reach even more people, about the legacy they were building together, not of wealth or status, but of changed lives and new possibilities. When they finally rode back down to the ranch, Caleb felt something he'd spent most of his life chasing without understanding what it was. Not validation from others, not proof of worth through external measures, just the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived, a partnership fully realized, a love that had been tested and proven strong enough to carry them through anything. The next morning, Caleb woke before dawn and found Lena already in the barn, working with a new arrival, a horse so traumatized it wouldn't let anyone near. She was sitting outside its stall, just being present, the way she'd taught him to be present with Phantom all those years ago. He brought her coffee and sat beside her in comfortable silence. This one's going to take a while, Lena said eventually. They all do. That's okay. You've got patience now. When did that happen? Caleb smiled. Around the time I realized that the best things in life are the ones you have to earn slowly, day by day, choice by choice. Like us. Exactly like us. They sat together as dawn broke over their ranch, their institute, their impossible dream made real. And Caleb understood finally, completely, what he'd been too young and stupid to see when he first rode into Dust Hollow. He hadn't been cheated out of his dream. He'd been led to something far greater, a life built not on appearance or status, but on trust, resilience, and a love that had to be earned. The horse in the stall took a tentative step toward them. Lena smiled, not moving, just letting the animal come at its own pace. Progress, she whispered. Always, Caleb agreed. And sitting there in the barn they'd built together, surrounded by broken things they'd helped heal, Caleb Rourke felt rich in ways that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with meaning. He'd come to Dust Hollow chasing a shallow dream and found instead a deep purpose. Had wanted a beautiful wife to validate his worth and discovered that worth came from who you became, not who you stood beside. Had thought he was claiming a prize when he married Lena, not realizing she was the one who'd saved him from his own ambition, his own blindness, his own small vision of what a good life could be. Years later, when people asked how they'd built the Institute, how they'd succeeded where others failed, Caleb would tell them the truth. We stopped trying to break things and started trying to understand them. Stopped forcing and started listening. Stopped chasing what we thought we wanted and started building what we actually needed. And Lena would add, with that blunt honesty that had first caught him off guard and eventually captured his heart. We failed a lot, fought harder, made mistakes that almost destroyed us. But we showed up anyway, every day, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. That was the real lesson. Not that love conquers all or that patience solves everything, but that the things worth having require work. That growth is painful. That choosing someone isn't a one-time decision, but a daily practice. That sometimes the life you build from broken pieces becomes stronger than anything that came easy ever could. And as Caleb sat in the barn with his wife, watching a traumatized horse take its first steps toward healing, he knew with absolute certainty that he'd trade none of it. Not the struggle, not the doubt, not the hard years or the harder lessons, because they'd led him here. To this moment, to this woman, to this life. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.